Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 7 of X's and O's for the fall 2019 semester. Isak and Joe Thompson. We're going to start in a different setting. We're going to start by talking about college football. We have, I guess, done that the last couple weeks, but we're going to be kind of taking a more broader scope.
Yeah.
NDSU's 10-0 on the season now. They just creamed Western Illinois 57-21, and really, what else can you say at this point? You know,
Yeah.
they just keep, like, this team just keeps on winning regardless of, you know, what team's thrown in front of them.
Yeah.
Every game is the other team's best shot, and they put up 50-plus points for the second straight game in conference play. So what else can you really say at this point?
I mean, just pure domination and just continuing to win, bumping up the winning streak from starting last year, or even
2 years
ago. Since they last lost, it's been, what,
31 now.
31 games? 31.
2 games off the all-time record that they set.
And, hey, they got 2 games left, so they could easily tie it in the regular season and then break it in the playoff once the playoffs start.
South Dakota next week, the week after at Southern Illinois. So those will be the final 2 games on the docket.
Just going to go through some stats here. Trey Lance, 17 of 22 passing, 313 yards, 2 touchdown passes. He had 3 rushes on the day for 42 yards and a touchdown as well. I'm just going to point this out. Another game, no interception for Trey Lance. That is unbelievable.
And here's the thing. I think Trey Lance last weekend had his best game as a college football player. I'm certain he had his best game.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like, the deep balls were working for him. You know, we hadn't seen too much of that throughout the last few weeks. He'd had some difficulty hitting deep balls, and really, you know, 313 yards, that's pretty anti-NDSU offense.
Oh, yeah.
Because
they are a huge, like, ground and pound team, and then eventually throw the ball in the air. But they've never been a true, like, deep ball threat.
They about doubled, I think, their passing output in terms of an average. They had, between Trey Lance and the backup Zeb Nolan, who came in for most of the second half, they did, I think, double their normal output for passing on the season, or pretty close to it, if not.
I mean, Christian Watson had 4 catches for 121 yards and a touchdown. So
he also had a touchdown taken off the board, too. That, you know, was called back because of, I think, a holding penalty or something.
That's tough.
But, yeah, that one touchdown that he did have to start the second half, just a little simple out pattern, you know, or either an out pattern or like a hitch. And, you know, the corner got too aggressive, tried to tackle him too. If for a lack of a better term, he tried to hit stick him or something. He just missed him, and Watson just using that speed. He's 6'3", but, you know, he can really run.
Oh, yeah.
And I was actually just in front of him on the field when he was running down that sideline. So quick. And so they've really gotten him more involved in the last few weeks, and I want to know what kind of role he has going forward, if he's going to continue to be a deep threat or if he's going to be used in situations like the touchdown he scored where he, you know, catches it and runs for a long way. You know?
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens, but that does not mean that just because they had a lot of good passing attack does not mean they didn't run the ball well.
Oh, man.
Specifically, Jalen Bussey, a freshman, he had 6 rushes for 123 yards and 2 scores. How about that? Good job for the freshman.
Yeah, and this is one of those games where, you know, they were planning on redshirting him this season.
Yep.
So this is one of the 4 games at maximum he's probably going to get this season, but he really made a tremendous first impression. First 2 carries of his NDSU career, touchdowns.
That's unbelievable. Really impressive to see for such a young player.
And the fact that he also was not used to this type of offense. He went to high school in Florida, and they didn't, and obviously they don't run too many fullback type formations down there. Florida's a state that breeds a lot of true athletes. So the fact that he was able to do that, running behind a fullback, his first 2 carries both go for touchdowns. You know, what does that say about him the rest of the way in his career? You know,
it'll really be interesting to see once he is fully able to get fully involved in the offense and become one of the top running backs that they go to. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out.
So that's a lot. So the game was a lot of fun for the most part. Defense also had 4 takeaways. Derek Tuska said after the game as well, the turnover margin is something they really emphasize. They won that handily, so they just,
Just all-around dominant performance, as usual, for NDSU
They'd
football.
like to see, obviously, fewer points allowed, but Western Illinois did get some plays on them in the second half when the game was pretty much already out of reach. So let's move off of NDSU then for the moment. Let's transition to more national FCS talk that we tried to get into last week. Illinois State, a huge win last weekend as well. They beat South Dakota State in Brookings by 9 points. And now we have to start questioning, with the loss of Jabari Gibbs and that SDSU team. SDSU, by the way, has a really good defense.
Yeah.
Tremendous defense in terms of personnel and stats they have. But now we have to start questioning, with UNI on the horizon for the South Dakota State Jackrabbits, are they a seeded team this year?
It's going to be tough because losing Jabari Gibbs was a huge blow for them. He was their starting quarterback, even as a redshirt freshman, but he was playing really, really well.
Super good.
Before he got hurt during the North Dakota State game. So that's going to play a big role. And if they continue to struggle without him, I don't see them being a seeded team in the playoffs. They'll still be a playoff team, no doubt. But I don't think they'll be one of the top seeds. They have been in the past.
They were number 4 when they lost at home to Illinois State. So, yeah, if they lose to if they have another home game against Northern Iowa, if they lose there, they're in trouble. I think they still have a chance to be seeded if they beat UNI, but
it's going to be interesting to see what happens these last couple of games.
I think the Valley is going to have at least 3 seeded teams this year after having only 3 playoff teams last year. So that should be, I really am interested in this whole down the stretch kind of race thing. Weber State survived a late scare last week against UND. Came down to a field goal at the end of the game. It was a 30-27 game, but UND has had a really weird season. They've had, you would say, quality losses to, NDSU. They lost 38-7 when they played the Bison, but then they've beaten a couple top 10 teams at home this year and almost beat the number 3 team on the road last week, and they were up in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I mean, they've shown flashes of being a pretty solid team, but then it's just kind of a mixed bag, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and UND, I think if they would have won against Weber State, they would have been a lock for the playoffs.
Yeah.
I don't see how you turn away a team with 3 top 10 wins on their resume. They beat UC Davis
and a quality
early
loss
in the
against
year.
North Dakota State early on in the season.
That too. So and also the fact that they have played pretty much. They're not a Big Sky team anymore. They're an independent team as they're going through the transition from the Big Sky to the
Missouri
MVFC.
Valley.
So they've played pretty much a full Big Sky schedule and have hung in there for the most part. They do have a bad loss. They do have an objectively bad loss on their resume, 55-20. But Weber State, they have. I said last week on our show they'd been kind of hitting their stride. They've been beating some good teams. Narrowly avoid a scare here. The number 2 team in the country, James Madison, obliterated New Hampshire last weekend at home, and New Hampshire considered a top 10 team in the polls. 54-16 was the final in that one. So James Madison,
they aren't going anywhere.
They had a couple rough games last year. They were not seeded last year and lost in the first round.
Losing in the first round and then losing their head coach to Eastern Carolina, but they've bounced back, I'd say, nicely.
I think they're probably going to be a prime contender to return to Frisco this season. They looked super good.
Yeah.
It'll be really interesting to see if NDSU and JMU are on opposite sides of the bracket, if there's that collision course like what we saw in 2017. I want to jump back to Northern Iowa. They managed to survive a scare against Indiana State at home, 17-9. With the recent events going on, obviously in Brookings, is UNI could potentially a top 4 team. They have one bad loss. They only have one loss in conference so far. That was to NDSU, but they were in there at halftime.
Yeah.
Where do you see, potentially UNI falling here?
I mean, obviously, as they had the one loss in conference, and they've played well overall so far in the season, I could definitely see them moving into the top 4 as long as they don't stumble towards the end of the season and have a really bad loss to maybe a mediocre team. I don't know their schedule, obviously, but if they suffer like a really bad loss or don't play really well and just survive, it could be really interesting to see where they go.
I do like UNI's quarterback in particular. He created some fits for the NDSU defense when they
Right.
played in Fargo. So, yeah, UNI, I mean, they do have South Dakota State next week, and I think they have a winnable game. I don't know I think it might be against Western Illinois. Not sure exactly who they play last week of the season, but I think UNI should win out the rest of the way, or maybe not win out. They will at least give SDSU a good run for their money next week. They should win their last game of the year. I know that for certain. So that's our talk on the FCS. The top 10 is really hard to evaluate at this point in the season with all that's gone on, and how can you really measure these teams up against really the top 3 or so, maybe even top 2, you know?
Yeah, that's a tough one to judge, honestly.
Because like if New Hampshire was 10th in the rankings last week and they get, they get blown out by 38 points against James Madison, and then you have teams like Central Arkansas and Furman also hanging around, potentially seeded. I have no idea how to rank these teams.
It's so tough to judge, honestly.
So that's our first segment on the FCS. Let's transition to a crazy weekend of major college football.
First time we're talking about FBS college football all semester
How about
for this
that?
show.
How
but
about
it's a good
that?
one and it's
It
a
was
fun one to talk about.
Probably worth the wait. So let's jump right in then to the probably one of let's say the second biggest game. We'll transition to the biggest game of the FBS last weekend. We'll start out with Minnesota versus Penn State. What do you got to say about that? Probably got a lot to say about this.
Yeah, one. I would just to start, I would say LSU, Bama is the more flashy, like highlight game, 2 major programs. I would say in terms of which teams played what, I'd say that would be the biggest game for the Gophers in the last 50 years, without a doubt.
No, not even close.
Not even close.
Nope.
But the Gophers, this is a great example. You give PJ Fleck 2 weeks to prepare for Penn State. This is what you're going to get. He knew how to attack their defense, and he attacked them with his great wide receivers. Rashad Bateman, 203 receiving yards, 13 catches, I believe.
Yep.
And at least
like
one
that.
touchdown, 2 touchdowns maybe.
So yeah, all the receivers for Minnesota, the top 3, Bateman, Tyler Johnson, and Chris Ottman-Bell, they all had a touchdown.
Yeah.
And Rashad Bateman went off for over 200 yards as well. Against a Penn State defense that had been averaging less than 10 points allowed per game.
They hadn't allowed more than 20 points all season until they played the Gophers, in which the Gophers led that entire game, but there was one point where it was tied. But for the most part, the Gophers led that entire game.
Yep.
It was such a well-coached game. The Gophers are so well-coached. It did get a little bit dicey at the end, not going to lie.
Well,
because Penn State made a furious comeback, and they had it inside the 20. But then a very lucky offensive pass interference call moved them back 15 yards, and then an untimely interception with a minute left sealed the win for the Gophers. Really, overall, just a fantastic game to see as someone who grew up a Gopher fan.
Oh, yeah, both of us, really.
And just to see the Gophers move into the top 10 in the AP poll after that, and it could be in really...
This number 7.
Number 7.
That's what they are now.
They haven't been ranked in the top 10 since 1962 when they were ranked number 5.
That was the year after they won their championship, right?
Or it was they last won the national championship in 1960, but they did go to the Rose Bowl in 1961.
There you go.
But it was one of the happier moments of my life as a Gopher fan, just watching that interception happen. I got so excited. I jumped out of my chair at the Buffalo Wild Wings. It was really exciting. I really, really enjoyed it.
I was getting notifications before the NDSU Western Illinois game. Unbelievable to see the notification that Minnesota got the interception against Clifford late. The defense, though, for Minnesota forced 3 interceptions in the game, 2 of which by Antoine Winfield Jr., son of Antoine Winfield, former Bills and Vikings defensive back. Antoine Winfield is one of the best secondary players in the nation.
Oh, 100%.
He now
There's no way. As a safety, he has 7 interceptions.
That's hard to do.
That's hard to do.
That's amazing. 2 of those, and both those interceptions were on deep balls. The first one was arguably more impressive than the second one. The second one just kind of was a floater that he just happened to be there, but he still
got hit as he threw.
But Winfield still had the range to get there. But the first one, the ball skill is tremendous on that one.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
otherwise, really good win for Minnesota. I knew that they had at least a good chance of winning.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just
I thought
with
they had
the
a
way
chance,
that
too.
play. The inside zone is a PJ Fleck special, and they have such a huge offense. And Minnesota has a huge offensive line. They were pushing Penn State's lauded defensive line back for most of the
Yeah.
first half. They got the run game established, and Tanner Morgan, their quarterback, really accurate, only 2 incompletions in the
Yeah.
game. That's how you win.
Tanner Morgan's really coming out of his shell.
Right.
He struggled a little bit to start the year, but as time has gone on and as he gotten more comfortable in the offense and how they would like to do it, he's really shown up, and I think it's really impressive to see that Minnesota finally has a really good quarterback that they can have for at least a couple more years.
I said this, internally, but I mean, Minnesota is not used to having, the threat of the forward pass be relevant in their offense.
Not for a very long time.
Not for a super long time. Probably not for like 10 years when Adam Weber was the Gophers quarterback.
And
but
even then, he wasn't. He was good, but he wasn't super like what Tanner Morgan's been doing.
So the Purdue game this year really, I think, turned a corner for probably most people within that program. The Purdue game from Tanner Morgan, he had, I think, 1 incompletion in that game and led the Gophers to a road win. Here in a huge game at home, he again goes off for 90% completion.
It's great.
Really
it's crazy.
great for Minnesota to see them succeed. Let's transition then to the other really good game from last weekend. Number 2 versus number 3 in the college football playoff poll. LSU versus Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and LSU pulls out the victory after a tremendous game.
Tremendous game individually for LSU. Their first win over Alabama, I believe, since 2011.
Yep.
Joe Burrow, great. He's my favorite for the Heisman Trophy right now. He had 31 of 39, 393 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. You can't overlook Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He had 20 carries for 103 yards for 3 touchdowns. He was bowling over.
Good.
He was running over Alabama defenders, and Alabama has a good defense.
Brad Nestler on the CBS broadcast was saying and Gary Danielson, I think, probably maybe said it, but 22 on LSU, Edwards-Helaire reminded them a lot of Darren Sproles.
Yeah.
Because of the way that he is, so shifty and so fast at such a small height for a running back.
Yeah, and he could just get around these defenders seemingly with ease. It's just really impressive to see.
The touchdown he had near the goal line where he spun out an Alabama defender, that is unfathomable. I could not, my eyes, were like dinner plates when I saw that thing. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
This dude is so good. I couldn't believe my eyes, man.
And I just got to shout out the LSU head coach, Coach Ed Orgeron. Coach O, when he was first hired as the LSU head coach, people were laughing at it, saying it was not the really greatest hire, even though he led USC as an interim head coach to a 6-3 record, which arguably is pretty good. But they were kind of poo-pooing that hire. They didn't think it was a good one. But look at him now. Obviously, he got Joe Burrow over from Ohio State, so that helps a ton. But he's done a great job of recruiting, and he's a much better coach than people took him credit for. And he could lead LSU to not only the college football playoff, but potentially a national championship.
I think,
which would be really, really cool to see.
LSU proved a lot,
Absolutely.
scoring 46 points on Alabama on the road. I think they're for real this season.
Yeah, and it showed that Alabama, the first time Alabama faces real competition, they struggled. They gave up 46 points at home.
This has been a problem for Alabama for many years.
They scheduled their first half of the season until conference play with just soft teams and FCS teams that they could just beat up on.
And the SEC West has been so diluted of late.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's not really anybody credible to threaten Alabama other than maybe Auburn in a couple years.
Yeah.
But LSU hadn't been getting the respect. Now that they have. Texas A&M hasn't been very good. Arkansas is really, really bad in that division.
Didn't Arkansas just fire their head coach after 22 games?
Don't know.
I think so. I think that happened.
Okay, but now the SEC West may have a new champion, potentially at least, depending on what LSU does the rest of the year.
Which is a breath of fresh air for all college football fans, let's be honest here.
If Alabama drops out of the college football playoff ranking, it won't be a surprise. If they don't make the playoffs, that would not be a surprise either.
No.
Their strength of schedule is really, really poor, and the fact that they finally played somebody good on their home field, they lose. What do you do now?
Yeah.
I don't think you put them in.
I don't think you put them in either, but
if the season ended today, and also, I mean, if they don't win their division and they don't go to the SEC championship game, how can you justify putting them in when they're a non-division champ? It's happened before, but let's make sure that doesn't happen, okay? College football playoff voters,
please,
right?
can we just have one college football playoff without Alabama in it? Just one?
So last week, the college football playoff was Ohio State 1, LSU 2, Bama 3, and Penn State 4. Both of those 3 and 4 teams are going to be out for certain. Penn State's going to fall down. Bama's going to fall down. So that gives Clemson and Oklahoma potentially Clemson's a lock.
Oh, Clemson's a lock, yeah. Oklahoma, after the loss to Kansas State, shout out Chris Kleiman, and they've struggled against, who did they play last Saturday?
Oklahoma played against Iowa State, and it came down to a 2-point conversion at the end.
And so
it let the Cyclones come back.
Yeah, Iowa State's a decent team. They played really well, but against an unranked team in Iowa State, that's not a good look for Oklahoma with the talent that they have.
At home in Norman, too.
At home. So that's a tough look for them. Hopefully, they have to play extremely, extremely well over the last couple weeks of this college football season to have a shot at the playoff. Because Jalen Hurts, he's gone after this year, and he's going to go to the NFL. So we'll have to see what happens with that.
I think as well for the potential 4th spot in the playoffs. I think the Pac-12 champion potentially gets in. We haven't seen them in the playoff the last couple years.
Not since Washington, I believe.
Nope.
And Washington got absolutely steamrolled by Alabama.
I think Oregon matched up pretty well against Auburn earlier in the year. I think Oregon has a good shot at making it should they win the Pac-12.
I would agree with that 100%.
All right, so that's our FBS talk for the very first time on our show. Let's transition then to professional football as we continue to climb up the rankings in this all-football episode of X's and O's. Let's begin with the Minnesota Vikings, their huge win in Arlington last night over Dallas, 28-24. What does this mean for the Vikings season going forward?
This is a statement win for the Minnesota Vikings. It not only was it was a statement for Kirk Cousins, even though it was overall a team game. He played really, really well, didn't have any picks, had 2 touchdown passes to Kyle Rudolph, and played really well. Kyle Rudolph finally showed out. He had those 2 touchdown catches. He had a really impressive one-handed catch for the first score of the game. Mm-hmm. And that was also an impressive throw by Kirk Cousins, throwing off balance on his back foot.
Herky-jerky throwing it like that, you know?
Off his back foot, off balance. Really nice play. Dalvin Cook, he didn't do much in terms of rushing yards, but they had used him. He
still had over 100, right? Or close to 100?
He had 97 rushing yards, which came later in the second half. But he really was shut down rushing the ball, but he made up for it with receiving yards because they used him so well in screen passes that the Dallas just wasn't able to stop.
I think the only reason Cook had less than 100 yards is because he lost like 5 yards in his last carry.
I think so.
But I thought the running game was tremendous against Dallas yesterday.
Yeah.
Alexander Madison had some good moments. Yeah. But Kirk Cousins did what he needed to do.
Oh, yeah. That's all he needed to do, really. Just play well, don't turn the ball over.
And I like what he said at the end of the game, too. Like, a reporter, I think it was Michelle Tafoya of NBC, was asking him, or was going to ask him a question about, hey, you finally
won a game against a team with a winning record.
Right.
And he goes, the
Minnesota Vikings won a game against a team in prime time with a winning record.
It's a team game. Well, I don't get why people don't understand that. They just pick on Kirk Cousins because he's the easy guy to pick on. But football's a team sport.
Just like exactly what we said last week. So, yeah, if you want more in-depth thoughts on that subject.
Keep pushing your narrative on Kirk Cousins. Just go for it, even though it's a team sport, but whatever.
If you want more in-depth thoughts on that, watch our episode last week.
There were some points that I thought were a bit shaky. The Vikings secondary did not look very good at all. That was the one dark spot that I had. They shut down Ezekiel Elliott, but Amari Cooper went off.
Yeah, that was objectively bad. I think that was the worst performance I think I've ever seen a Vikings secondary have in my time watching Vikings football.
Yeah, and specifically
and still winning at least.
Still winning the game.
Yeah.
Overall, it was a good performance, and the secondary showed up late with that great Pass defense by Eric Kendricks.
Yes.
It was
Putting
really,
Eric
really good.
Kendricks against a running back in space works against a lot, like putting Ezekiel Elliott in space against a linebacker for a quick out works against a lot of linebackers, but apparently not Eric Kendricks.
Eric Kendricks
so
has
good
been playing really well this season.
He's playing at such an elite level, and the Vikings got him for a pretty, I think they got him for a bargain pretty recently when they signed him to an extension.
They signed him to an extension, but I think they restructured it this past offseason to make room for the Anthony Barr signing and signing Kyle Rudolph.
They got him for a bargain.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
With how he's playing, just outstanding, probably among the elite. I mean, I think metrics also say that Eric Kendricks is an elite middle linebacker in the NFL.
Oh, 100%. I would agree with that.
So then let's transition now. We're moving off the Vikings for the moment. Good win for the Vikings. They're now 7-3 on the year.
Five of their last 6 wins.
Keeping pace with the 8-2 Green Bay Packers, hanging on yet again to beat Carolina by 8 points at home in the snow.
Shut down Christian McCaffrey when you needed to the most. Just less than half a yard short.
Maybe like that much, he was separating him from the end zone.
All because he ran into his offensive lineman.
So Carolina's in an interesting spot.
Yeah.
They are, still playing well, obviously, with Kyle Allen at quarterback, and now there are circulations surrounding whether Cam Newton's going to get traded this offseason.
I think it's actually pretty likely because Kyle Allen's been playing well enough to where you could justify getting rid of Cam Newton, especially if he's still not fully healthy.
So,
and they'd save a bunch of money in cap space by getting rid of him.
So you want to, maybe keep an eye on that as an NFL fan in the near future.
In the near future during the offseason.
So Green Bay wins. They're now 8-2. They join the San Francisco 49ers as the only 8-win teams in the NFC. The San Francisco 49ers play tonight at home against Seattle on Monday Night Football.
That's going to be a really good game.
That's going to be a tremendous football game. I cannot wait to see how
That'll revive the
that
rivalry that the 49ers
out.
and the Seahawks had when they were both really good and competing in the NFC Championship game for the Super Bowls and stuff like that.
Should be a really competitive game. Seattle's 7-2 to San Francisco's 8-0 so far. Seattle is 7 wins this season. Again, another 7. We just keep pulling these 7s out. But Seattle has had an interesting path to get to those 7 wins. They have played a lot of relatively weaker NFL teams so far in those 7 wins, but they have not really, won convincingly. They only have 1 win of their 7 that have been decided by more than 1 score, and that was against the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah.
They've played teams like Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and the Rams, who are just average this season, and other relatively poor teams in the NFL this season. They only beat the Bengals by 1 point in Week 1. Which doesn't look very good now.
No.
Especially, they only beat the Steelers by 2 in Week 2.
Especially considering what the Ravens just did to the Bengals, which we'll get to in a second. But continue with your Seattle point.
But, Seattle, they have won way too all their 7 wins have come way too close.
A lot of close games.
I don't trust them at the moment. They're going to need to really show out tonight against San Francisco's defense.
Riding the success of Russell Wilson, who's been playing like an MVP.
He has really played like an MVP. And after this game as well, San Francisco has a relatively tough schedule. I think they play against Green Bay and New England down the stretch, if I'm not mistaken.
Ooh, that New England game is going to be interesting.
Or am I thinking of somebody else? I don't know.
If that's the case, that's going to be a really interesting game.
Don't quote me on that, but so that Monday night game is going to be one to watch out for. We will be uploading this pretty close to YouTube, at least, pretty close to the time of that Monday Night Football game. So let's transition then. What else did you want to talk about with the NFL for last week?
I would like to talk about shower more praise on the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson, you are just a stud, man. I think we were talking a little bit before the show. I think we both agree that right now Lamar Jackson's the front runner for MVP. He played so well in the last 2 weeks. I believe he has had 2 weeks in a row, if not 2 weeks in a row, he's had 2 games where he's had a perfect passer rating. And people keep trying to make jokes that he's a running back or a wide receiver.
No, it's tired.
It's a tired narrative.
Tired.
It's another tired narrative in the NFL.
Man.
And the dude won a Heisman in college as a quarterback. So, sure, he's an elite runner, but he can also throw the ball, clearly. He's been throwing the ball great. He's been playing great. If he keeps this pace up, I don't see why you don't give him the MVP.
Yeah, I really hope he wins. I really hope he wins.
His signature, I think his signature MVP play is going to be that touchdown run where he did that spin move and cut through 3 Bengals defenders. Like, my goodness. What other quarterback have you seen do that since Michael Vick?
Oh, man. He's the right-handed Michael Vick, I guess.
Right-handed Michael Vick.
Real quick, I want to run through a couple more things. Kansas City, tough loss yesterday. Patrick Mahomes returned, but the Tennessee Titans ultimately came out with a win late. Really discouraging for the Chiefs.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so weird because their defense, the Chiefs' offense has been really good for a very long time under Coach Andy Reid because he's an offensive guru. The biggest issue with the Chiefs has always been their defense. It's just always been the struggle. And then they struggled yet again. They let Ryan Tannehill to just cook you.
He didn't even have to really do much. Derrick Henry did a lot of the work yesterday.
Ryan Tannehill, shout out to him. He's been 3-1 since he took over from Marcus Mariota. And the Chiefs just unfortunately benefited from a really questionable no offsides call, even though it's the guy who blocked the kick.
I think he was onside.
I think so too.
He timed it perfectly.
Yeah. But
he timed that thing perfectly.
There were arguments that were like, was he offsides? But after review, it looked like he wasn't, so it was all good. But there was just a great block by that Titans defender on that field goal that saved that won them the game.
Last thing I wanted to touch on, the New Orleans Saints, an embarrassing performance at home against a 1-win Atlanta Falcons team. Falcons had 6 sacks in the game on Drew Brees, and it was a 27-9 game, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Just a really poor effort at home.
To the sacks point, it's like, going into that game, the Falcons had only 7 sacks all season. And they had 6 in one game. That really will bump their defensive numbers up a little bit.
Really don't know how you let that happen to a defense that has really
very
ravaged
poor
by injuries and
just overall not very good.
So, final remarks then on the NFL for Week 10 now.
You made an interesting point on the Rams. I think I would agree that they have been average this year. They still have a lot of talent on that team. I think teams are finally starting to figure out how Sean McVay works, and it could be really interesting to see what happens with the rest of the season. And I still think they are riding that appearance in the Super Bowl hangover. So we'll have to see what happens. They are going against a really tough competition in the Seahawks and the Rams. So getting into the playoffs is going to be really tough for the Rams.
And the 49ers, too. Keep in mind, But, the Rams are currently, I think, 1.5 or 2 games out of a playoff spot right now. The Vikings currently have the 6th seed in the NFC.
If the Vikings continue to play well, they've won 5 of their last 6. Arguably should be winners of 6 in a row, but hey, whatever.
So that does it for an uncut, full football edition of X's and O's Fall 2019. We thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next week.